Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. Two characters, both with adamantium claws, both shaped by unimaginable trauma, both carrying Wolverine's legacy, yet one became a symbol of heroic redemption while the other embodied vengeful destruction. Today, we're diving into the mythic parallels and contrasting legacies of Darkclaw and Daken, how similar origins can create completely opposite archetypes, what their stories reveal about trauma and choice, and why one represents hope while the other warns of what we could become. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how these characters function as mythological mirrors and what their contrasting paths tell us about the nature of heroism itself. Let me bring in someone who's spent way too much time thinking about comic book psychology.
So we're talking about two characters who are basically case studies in how the same traumatic foundation can build completely different people. Darkclaw comes from the Amalgam Comics experiment of 1996, where DC and Marvel literally merged their characters.
Right, so Darkclaw is Batman plus Wolverine. That sounds like it should be the most brooding character ever created.
Exactly. Logan Wayne witnesses his parents' murder at age 5, just like Bruce Wayne. But then he gets sent to Canada, loses his uncle too, and eventually gets the Weapon X treatment with adamantium bonding.
So he's got the tragic backstory of Batman, but the physical enhancement of Wolverine. What does he do with all that?
Here's what's fascinating. According to the Amalgam database, the Weapon X project failed because Logan was ineffective as a weapon because he possessed a conscience. His trauma didn't break his moral compass.
Wait, so they tried to turn him into a weapon and he was too good for the job?
Exactly. He spent years traveling the world, learning 127 major combat styles from Aikido to Yaoyan, training with everyone from French manhunters to Nepalese monks. But he channeled all that into fighting crime.
That's such a Batman move, turning trauma into this obsessive pursuit of justice. But what about his public persona?
Oh, this is where it gets interesting. To the world, Logan Wayne is this irresponsible techno-wizard playboy artist who lives off his family fortune and sells paintings. Classic Bruce Wayne energy.
So he's got the billionaire playboy cover story down. Now let's talk about Daken, because he's coming from a very different place, right?
Completely different. Daken, whose real name is Akihiro, first appeared in Wolverine Origins number 5 in August 2006. He's literally Wolverine's son, but his story is about abandonment and manipulation.
And according to what I found, his mother Itsu was killed shortly after giving birth, leaving him for dead?
Right. He survived because of his healing factor, got taken in by a wealthy Japanese family, but then, and this is crucial, he was manipulated by Romulus, who conditioned him to hate Wolverine.
So while Darkclaw had tragedy but chose heroism, Daken had tragedy plus active manipulation toward villainy.
Exactly. And here's what's really dark. According to the Marvel database, Akihiro killed his adoptive family after discovering they didn't truly love him. He rejected his birth name and took on Daken, which was actually a childhood slur.
Wow. So he literally embraced the hate that was directed at him and made it his identity.
And Daniel Way, his creator, said that while Logan is trying to take control of his destiny, Akihiro is heading in the opposite direction, hacking, slashing, and going nuts.
That's such a perfect contrast. But let's talk about their powers, because they're both enhanced, but in different ways, right?
Darkclaw has the classic Wolverine package, regenerative healing, adamantium skeleton, retractable claws, but he also has Batman's detective skills and that incredible training regimen we mentioned.
So he's basically the ultimate combination of physical enhancement and intellectual preparation.
Right. But Daken? He's got similar healing and claws, but according to First Curiosity, his healing factor is mentally commanded, making it instant and faster. Plus, he has pheromone manipulation.
Pheromone manipulation, that sounds like a really invasive power.
It is. He can influence emotions and judgment, basically manipulate people at a chemical level. The Gabbing Geek article mentions he once used them to reduce Scar, son of Hulk, to his human form.
That's terrifying. So Darkclaw relies on skill and conscience, while Daken has powers that are inherently about control and manipulation.
And that reflects their fundamental approaches to the world. Darkclaw builds relationships, he works with Sparrow, the Huntress, even has romantic relationships with fellow vigilantes like Cat's Eye and Fox Bat.
While Daken, let me guess, not so much with the healthy relationships?
Well, he was a member of Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers, the Brotherhood of Mutants, and at one point became a Horseman of Death. He literally took his father's code name, Wolverine, just to spite him.
That's such a power move, stealing your father's identity as an act of rebellion. But I read that his story eventually changes?
Yeah, during the Krakoan Age, he actually reformed. According to Wikipedia, he made peace with his father and became a member of X-Factor and the Marauders, eventually earning the title of Fang for his heroism.
So he gets a redemption arc. That's interesting. It suggests that even someone shaped by manipulation and hatred can choose differently.
Exactly. But here's what's wild. He's also been killed and resurrected multiple times. Most recently, he was resurrected by a demon and became something called Helverine.
Helverine? That sounds like Marvel just threw darts at a board of supernatural concepts.
Right? The Gabbing Geek writer literally said, "Cripes, Marvel, can't you leave well enough to learn?" But it shows how Daken's story keeps cycling between redemption and corruption.
That's actually really interesting from a mythological perspective. Dark Claw has this linear journey from trauma to heroism, while Daken's path is cyclical.
And that brings us to what these characters represent. According to the Springer book on comic book mythology, superheroes function as emergent modern mythology that reflects our hopes and desires.
So Dark Claw represents the mythic ideal, that trauma can be transformed into purpose, that we can choose to be better than what happened to us.
Exactly. He's the hero archetype, someone who, as the Very Big Brain article describes, has a strong moral compass, selflessness, and clear goals toward a noble cause.
While Daken is more of an anti-hero or even villain, someone who, according to literary devices, exists in that murky moral grey area and is motivated by personal gain or revenge.
But here's what's fascinating. They both start from similar places. Both have Wolverine's powers. Both experience profound loss and abandonment. The difference is in the choices they make.
And the support systems around them. Dark Claw chooses to build connections, while Daken was actively taught to embrace isolation and hatred.
Right. And their legacies reflect that. Dark Claw was part of this experimental publishing event that lasted from 1996 to 1997, 24 one-shots total, that created this whole alternate mythology.
The Amalgam Comics thing is so meta when you think about it. They created fake letter columns with amalgamated city names to make it feel like these characters had decades of history.
Exactly. They were creating instant mythology. Meanwhile, Daken has had this long, complex publication history since 2006, cycling through different teams and identities.
And according to Comics Alliance, he was ranked 6th in their list of 50 sexiest male characters in comics, well ahead of his father at 41st place.
Which is interesting because it shows how audiences are drawn to that dangerous, morally ambiguous energy. There's something compelling about characters who embrace their darkness.
But that brings up an important point. Are we supposed to admire Daken, or is he a cautionary tale?
I think he's both. He shows us what we could become if we let trauma and manipulation define us, but his eventual redemption also shows that change is possible.
While Dark Claw represents the more aspirational path, the idea that we can transform our pain into purpose from the beginning.
And both characters deal with the question of legacy. Dark Claw, according to the Amalgam database, becomes the father of a hero called Wild Hunt in a possible future.
So even his legacy is heroic. Meanwhile, Daken's relationship with his father Wolverine has been this central source of conflict throughout his story.
Right. There's this quote from Akihiro in the Marvel database. "I never knew my father. I was raised to be someone different than him, and now I'm supposed to be him."
That's so loaded. He's struggling with this identity that was forced on him versus who he actually wants to be.
And that's the core difference. Dark Claw chose his identity as a response to trauma. Daken had his identity chosen for him, and he spent decades trying to figure out who he actually is.
Which makes his eventual redemption more meaningful in some ways. It's harder to choose good when you've been programmed for evil.
Exactly. And both characters show us different aspects of the hero's journey. Dark Claw represents the classical path: trauma, training, purpose, heroism.
While Daken shows us that the journey isn't always linear. Sometimes you have to fall before you can rise.
And in a weird way, they're both necessary myths. We need the Dark Claw story to show us what's possible, and we need the Daken story to show us that redemption is always available.
So when you step back from all this, what we're really looking at is two different answers to the same fundamental question. What do you do when the world breaks you?
Exactly. Dark Claw says you can choose to be better immediately. Daken says even if you choose wrong at first, you can still find your way back. Both are valid, both are necessary.
And both remind us that having power, whether it's adamantium claws or just influence over others, doesn't determine whether you're a hero or villain. That's still a choice.
Right. These characters show us that the same basic ingredients can create completely different outcomes depending on the moral framework we choose to operate within.
Which brings us back to where we started. Two characters with similar origins but opposite destinies. Except now we understand that those destinies weren't inevitable.
They were chosen. And that's probably the most important lesson both characters teach us, that we always have the power to choose who we become.
Thanks for joining us on Copilot Podcasts. The next time you're facing your own version of trauma or manipulation, remember, you've got both Darkclaw and Daken as guides. One shows you the direct path to heroism, the other shows you it's never too late to change course.